Thank you, Silvia, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Before I start my presentation, I'd like to say that for me, it is a pleasure to be back here in Gainesville after 9 years and see again friends and colleagues from the time I did my PhD here. I would also like to thank Betty for accepting my proposal to do my exchange visit here, my Fulbright exchange visit here, and also thank the Tropilunch organizers for inviting me to share my project with you. I know the Tropilunch is an institution here at the Center of Latin American Studies. Fulbright Amazonia scholars are required to carry out individual research projects. Mine is about environmental governance in the Peruvian Amazon, and the degree to which civil society actors participate in these processes, and if this participation can be improved. So, let me start my presentation by asking you to do a little exercise. In this slide, I have 3 clippings about environmental issues. So I'd like you to take a moment to read the 3 headlines and then tell me, what do you think they have in common?
Okay.
Ready? Extraction. Okay.
Illegal extraction.
Illegal extraction of natural resources. Okay. What else? Peru, okay, yeah. Those are problems that happen in Peru, okay, yeah. Anything else?
Authorities are involved in giving out.
Esa cosa no tiene.
Okay.
In addition, like the authorities are fighting the local community or the views of the people. Like people are trying to protect the Amazon, but the government is trying to run the authority.
Right.
For extraction of systems. Interest groups.
Right. So, okay.
It's new way of imperialism.
Imperialism? Yeah. All the things you have said are related to environmental governance. So, in order to understand these environmental governance problems, we need first to know what environmental governance is. So, yeah. So there are many definitions of environmental governance, but one that is useful for my research is the one that defines environmental governance as the transference of natural resource regulation from the state to non-state actors such as local communities, social movement organizations, NGOs, corporations, but also institutions such as international reports, corporate codes of conduct, like the corporate social responsibility, for example. And this participation of non-state actors in environmental governance is seen as something that is good, that is desirable, and important to improve accountability and inclusivity, because historically, not everybody participated in environmental governance. So environmental governance is by definition inclusive. So environmental governance is a process of decentering state power. But this has not happened spontaneously. This has been the result of at least two forces, two factors that have pushed to environmental governance. The demands posed by indigenous people and their allies in the academia, and also the implementation of neoliberal policies that emphasize mainly market-based mechanisms for resource use and regulation. So it is important to distinguish governance from government. They are not the same. Government, under government, participants are linked to the state. The government is based on a linear model, and this model is top-down. Decisions are made in high spheres of power, and at the bottom, civil society or citizens just have to follow those decisions. Government is based on formal institutions and procedures. Participation is based on representation through elections, and power is exerted through basically rules. In contrast, governance is based on the participation not only of state actors, but also non-state actors, as I said. The model of governance is more of a network. It is multi-layer instead of top-down. And an important difference between governance and government is that governance is a process, an evolving and ongoing process. Power is dispersed and opaque, and there is a wider participation of actors in governing natural resources. So government is different, totally different from governance. So the idea is that what is best for natural resource management and regulation, we need to go from government to governance. We need to have more governance and less government. Why? Because government is based on more rigid and narrower set of activities. The participants in government are limited to civil servants, elected politicians, and some influential or privileged stakeholders. In contrast, governance is based on a wider range of institutions that are involved in decision-making, rules, participants, both within and outside the state. And governance also involves a wider circle of stakeholders, but we don't have to believe that in governance the state disappears. The state under governance is still a player. The state still plays a role under governance, but the state has lost the monopoly of control and regulation of natural resources, because this control and regulation is now distributed among a wider set of actors. So, but in the case of the Peruvian Amazon, those non-state actors that have gained more power and participation in environmental governance are those related to market and the private sector. So some people have labeled this kind of environmental governance as neoliberal environmental governance, because this type of governance is the result of neoliberal policies that have promoted, for example, privatization of natural resources, the reduction of states' regulatory functions, and shift from the state regulation to self-regulatory processes. So this is what is happening in Peru. In the Peruvian Amazon, what we have now is a neoliberal style environmental governance, because this is based on these policies of privatization, reduction of the role of the state in the regulation of natural resources, and the domination of self-regulatory processes like for example, the corporate codes of conduct, the corporate social responsibility. So under this neoliberal environmental governance, environmental laws are poorly enforced by the state. The state has no ability or political will to enforce environmental laws. But that doesn't mean that natural resources are not governed. They are governed, but they are governed by the corporations, illegal resource extractors, like, for example, illegal gold miners, and market-based mechanisms. And what about civil society actors? Civil society actors play a subordinate role in these processes. They just follow the decisions made by corporations. They don't participate much in decision-making processes. And as a result, environmental governance is less democratic because not everybody participates in governance. It's market-based dependent, because most of the mechanisms that are used for environmental governance are market-based. And most importantly, it is environmentally unfriendly, because these corporations, these private sector actors, they don't care about environmental standards, they don't care about environmental management. So under this context, environmental governance is environmentally unfriendly. So this leads me to these research questions. For my project, I'd like to know what factors may increase environmental governance performance in the Peruvian Amazon. And when I say environmental governance performance, I mean a more democratic, inclusive environmental governance. Another question is, what role are civil society actors, for example, social movement organizations, NGOs? What role are these actors playing in the environmental governance of this region in Peru? And how can civil society actors effectively counterbalance the role played by market-based actors? How can we have a more democratic and equitative environmental governance? Those are my three questions. And in order to answer these questions, I propose these methodological tools, mainly from the anthropology, because I've been trained as an anthropologist. So I'm going to use case studies. I'm going to use 3 case studies in order to collect data to answer these questions. I'm going to use also ethnographic interviews, focus groups, participant observation, and archival research. I'm going to explain each of these methods. I'm going to use 3 case studies to collect data to respond my research questions. The first one is illegal gold mining in Madre de Dios. Madre de Dios is this region in the southeastern Peruvian Amazon area in red. And the economy of this region is based mainly on gold mining operations, but the vast majority of gold mining in Madre de Dios is illegal, which means not only that gold miners don't pay taxes, but also they don't follow environmental standards. So one of the main results of this illegal gold mining is, for example, deforestation, as you can see in this picture. I took this picture close to the indigenous community where I did my PhD fieldwork. Gold miners are causing a lot of deforestation in Madre de Dios. But not only that, they are contaminating waterways, rivers, streams, which are the sources of water for drinking, bathing, washing for the local communities, and also the fish that live in the rivers. And fish is one of the main sources of protein for the local communities. But also the gold mining is contaminating the air that these people breathe, because they use mercury in order to separate the gold from the sand. And when they burn mercury, the gas goes to the atmosphere. So these are huge problems in this area. If you go to Madre de Dios, don't eat fish in a restaurant, for example, because it's probably will have mercury. And the problem with gold mining in Madre de Dios is that the gold mining regulation is not enforced at all. There is regulation of gold mining that authorities don't have the resources to enforce those regulations, but also they don't have the political will to solve the problem. So the main approach of the state to gold mining is repression. The military do raids. They go to the mining camps. They destroy the mining equipment. But miners return to their mining camps after the military raid. So it's like a vicious circle. The problem is not solved. And what can we do to solve this? And we know that illegal gold mining is spreading throughout the Peruvian Amazon, not only in other areas. You have gold mining also in the northern part of the Peruvian Amazon. My second case study is oil spills in Loreto. Loreto is this department we call states departments in Peru. So this red area is Loreto is one of the biggest departments in Peru. So in Loreto there are a lot of oil concessions granted mainly to foreign oil corporations. So historically, there's been a lot of oil spills in this area all the time. The crude is taken to the coast through pipelines, and these pipelines are old and corroded. The oil companies don't do maintenance of these pipelines, and they break and shatter easily. So oil spills occur all the time and mainly affect the territories of native communities, of indigenous communities. So we all know what are the effects of crude in the water that people drink, and how this affects fish and all that. So because authorities don't listen to these indigenous people, they have to protest. They do demonstrations and rallies all the time in order to demand the state to solve these problems. But the response of the state has been the criminalization of this protest. So the indigenous leaders are taken to jail. There are when the native communities, for example, when they try to contact the corporation to find a solution, they don't respond. Corporations don't answer the phone. They leave the area after they have contaminated the land and the waterways. When they are invited to public hearings to try to negotiate a solution, they don't attend. And when they participate in these meetings, they sign countless of agreements, these written documents, where the parts involved in the conflict commit themselves to do tasks to solve the problem. So, but this, although we have a lot of these agreements, the problems still happen. So these public hearings haven't been the solution for this problem. My third case study is timber concessions within indigenous lands in Loreto, in the same department. Here, the regional government is in charge of granting timber concessions. So the regional government of Loreto has granted more than 40 logging concessions within reserves for the protection of indigenous people in isolation, even though this is illegal. So these 47 timber concessions are illegal because you cannot grant logging concessions within these indigenous reserves. So what happens here? Recently, the because it is prohibited to grant logging concessions within these indigenous reserves. The logging industry has allied with the regional government and some congressmen to change legislation in order to pass the authority to create indigenous reserves from the national government to the regional government. Why? Because they want to, with this law, they want to stop the creation of new indigenous reserves and to annul the existing ones so that they can freely grant logging concessions within these reserves. And everybody knows that the presence of logging workers within these indigenous reserves is very dangerous for indigenous people in isolation because they can produce unwanted contact with the logging brigades and also the spread of little diseases to the indigenous people. So these are my three case studies. My idea is to investigate why this is happening, why regulations are not enforced, why corporations have more power than indigenous organizations, and what we can do to improve this. So I'm going to use also ethnographic interviews. I'm planning to interview the leaders of these indigenous federations, both national federations and regional federations. For example, in Peru, the National Indigenous Federation is called IDESEP, but also we have all these regional indigenous federations. I like also to interview the chiefs of indigenous communities, native communities, also the leaders of indigenous women's organizations, NGO workers, national and regional officials, and also the Ombudsman Office, the Defensoría del Pueblo, which is an autonomous organization that oversees the protection of citizens' human rights. And the Ombudsman Office is involved as a mediator in conflicts that have resulted from the presence of corporations within indigenous communities. I'm going to use also focus groups. My interviews are going to allow me to identify key informants, key participants in my research. So once I have identified these key participants, I'm going to invite them to do a focus group with me. Also, I'm going to use participant observation because, as I said, one of the main tools that are used to deal with this problem, with these conflicts, is the public hearings. Peru is a signatory of the Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization. So there is a law that requires corporations and all resource extractors to consult indigenous people about projects and laws that may affect their rights and interests. So I'm gonna attend these public hearings of prior consultation. There is also, this is dialogue tables or mesas de diálogo that are set up to negotiation and working tables. These are the working tables and the mesas de trabajo, working tables. They countless working tables, dialogue tables, but the problems continue. And finally, I'm going to use archival research in order to analyze the products of these meetings, these public hearings and dialogue tables and working tables. Because after these meetings, they sign these documents. You know? Here you can see a picture of indigenous leaders happily showing one of these agreements. But my feeling is that these agreements is letra muerta, dead letter, because at least the state and the corporation, they don't follow the, I mean, even though they commit themselves to carry out tasks to solve the problem, after that they forget about it. They don't follow their own commitments. But it's important to see how many of these documents are produced, what are the commitments that the several actors say that they're going to fulfill, and most importantly, why these agreements are not followed. So this is basically my research project. I hope you can give me some ideas about how to improve it. Finally, I like to thank the Fulbright Amazonia for financing my research and my exchange visit here at UF, and also the TCD for accepting my proposal of my exchange visit. Thank you.